This is a CNA podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Climate Conversations. I'm your host, Julie Yu. When it comes to the environment, a few elements come to mind, such as carbon and oxygen and H2O, or what's more commonly known as water. But you may have also heard about hydrogen. It's non-toxic, highly combustible, and touted as a superbly clean fuel, potentially the future of clean energy. However, the process of getting the clean parts out of the gas is still a work in progress and currently very costly. So it seems there's a long way to go before it can transform our energy landscape. My guest today is hoping to change that with her company. Tulika Raj is CEO and co-founder of startup SunGreen H2, a Singapore-based clean tech startup which is on a mission to unlock low-cost green hydrogen production. Tulika, welcome to the Climate Conversations.
Thank you.
So let's start right from the very beginning. Take us back to how your fascination with energy started, how it has played a big part in your life.
Wow, we have to really go back. Energy has been a part of my life from very early. As a young child, I saw what the geopolitical implications of energy usage are. As an expat in the Middle East during the first Gulf War, my family and I were displaced. I saw firsthand what it's like to be a refugee from your own home because of geopolitical conflict that's related to energy consumption and energy ownership. But as an electrical engineer, when I'd finally trained and started working, I found myself on offshore oil and gas rigs in Kazakhstan and then Norway. And it was an early introduction to the fossil fuel industry. It was a very close, upfront look. And as soon as I could, I turned around and joined Climate Tech 1.0. So as a young engineer, I was instinctively called to, back in 15 years ago, wind and solar was very new. Aspirations in the energy transition were just beginning. And so then helped build BP Alternative Energy's first wind farms in India and China. It was a fantastic time before the Lehman crash, the global financial crisis, a put paid to oil and gas majors, then a retraction a little bit from clean energy. But registering those first carbon credits from the first wind farms, seeing them being traded back into the EU emissions trading scheme, the EU ETS, just brought home to me that we can actually do something about energy transition. And these are the mechanisms. So I found myself very fortunately placed, sort of seeing how we might start unfolding solutions to the climate change problem and the energy transition.
Wow. So oil and gas and sun and wind, it's certainly been an exciting journey. But for your own startup, of all things in the climate space, you chose to focus on hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular. Why was that?
Today, in 91% of the world's electricity markets, the cheapest new form of generation is either onshore wind or solar. This is how far we've come. When I was thinking about what I want to do next, I was sort of drawn to the idea, well, wind and solar are here to stay. They're already getting cheaper by the day. What can we do about the next decarbonization? And urgently, our carbon buckets are really sitting in industries, in transportation and mobility. And not everything can be directly renewably electrified. You can't take wind and solar to make steel directly, for example. And if you need base load power, something that Europe is grappling with very badly right now as a result of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, this is where I believe that where renewable electricity cannot go, I was interested in seeking answers to what can go there. Hydrogen can go there, batteries can go there, and a whole host of new technologies. So I want to spend the next stint of my career, I guess, trying to bring a breakthrough technology to the market to lower the cost of hydrogen, green hydrogen specifically, so that we can have something that's the next clean energy disruptive technology, be low cost and therefore widely adopted, because you need wide scale adoption for anything to actually work.
So tell us about the potential of green hydrogen and the range of applications for it. How could it help in the fight for a more sustainable future?
So what's amazing about hydrogen is it has a huge energy content, many tens of multiples more, let's say, than your average battery pack, for example. So it's a very energy dense molecule, hydrogen. We hear about hydrogen increasingly, but hydrogen is not a new market. It's a $150 billion market already. 90 million tons of hydrogen is currently being used globally. When we think about food and ag, Where is all our fertilizer and our ammonia coming from? It's coming from hydrogen. Steel and iron, chemicals, everyday use items that we have, the urban metropolis that we are in Singapore and worldwide. And these steel structures, steel requires a source of high heat. This is provided by hydrogen. So hydrogen is not a new commodity. It has been around for a very long time. Lots of it is being used. The problem with hydrogen is that it's being made from fossil fuels. And what is so interesting about hydrogen is that when you use it as a feedstock or you burn it as a fuel, it only creates water vapor. So there are no emissions. So just imagine a future where we have no emissions, like our air quality as the average citizen, you and me and our kids can breathe like this super clean air because you're using maybe electric or hydrogen vehicles and the grid is very green. So that is the promise of hydrogen. It is that it's a clean burning fuel and there are no emissions. However, if you make it by splitting the hydrocarbons in natural gas or coal, then the production of this hydrogen is creating 10 to 20 times as much carbon dioxide emissions. The global hydrogen industry right now is responsible for almost creating 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide emission. So it doesn't help the story to use it if we cannot make it carbon free. That's where green hydrogen comes in.
Exactly. But green hydrogen only constitutes about 0.1% of global hydrogen production right now. Why are the numbers so low?
Great question. So let's go back to what green hydrogen is. You need two things to make green hydrogen, and this is renewable electricity, so that the source of electricity that is being used to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen in an electrolyzer machine is green. So when the source energy is green and it's renewable electricity, you just need water, you split it in an electrolyzer, and out comes green hydrogen. So what do we need for cheap green hydrogen? Green hydrogen, believe it or not, was one of the first ways of manufacturing hydrogen globally. So 100 years ago, the first electrolyzers were the primary source of creating hydrogen until cheap fossil fuels came along in the 1960s and replaced this mode of production with an even cheaper form. So my point about green hydrogen, in order to be a large part of the market share or to regain its market share, to be honest, in hydrogen production needs to be cheap. Otherwise, industry is going to go for the cheapest fuel available. So this is what's happened with hydrogen, is that we didn't have a way to make it cheaper than fossil fuels, which is why the industry didn't really have a huge amount of green hydrogen in recent times. What has changed? In the last 15 years, renewable electricity has become extremely cheap and is getting cheaper by the day. What does that leave? It leaves electrolyzers. These are the last remaining bottleneck to affordable green hydrogen. If we can crack this, if we can get electrolyzers as cheap as we've seen sort of solar module prices and wind turbine prices come down, boom, we have a way to make green hydrogen cheaper than fossil fuel-based hydrogen. And that is what will get the industry to expand the current share of green hydrogen at 0.5% to almost as large a share as the current gray hydrogen market, which is almost 90%. And that's what's probably going to happen and play out over the next decade.
And this is where your startup SunGreen H2 comes in. Tell us how your technology works and what sort of benefit can it bring to people and the planet?
So how do we make hydrogen? We've already talked about electrolysis. So electrolysis is the process of splitting water molecules, just H2O into H2 and O2, and the hydrogen is perfectly clean and green. The problem with today's electrolyzer machines is that the 100-year-old technology is very inefficient. So it needs too much renewable energy, and that's very high in OpEx cost. And the newer technology is very expensive. It uses very expensive precious metals, platinum, gold, iridium, titanium in the machines. That makes it very hard to scale up. But also, we don't have enough iridium, for example, in the world to scale up certain types of electrolyzer machines to the hundreds of gigawatts of demand or the 80 million tons that's coming for it by 2030. So what SunGreen H2 has done is we are bringing a nanotech level advance to the core components of electrolyzers. These machines all use electrodes to trigger the electrochemical reaction of splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. And at this level, we've made an advance in the electrode, which allows us to dramatically increase the surface area available for the electrochemical reaction, which allows us to produce double the amount of hydrogen from a given electrolyzer cell size, using 10% lower energy consumption, and where platinum group metals are required in certain types of technologies, 30 times lower amount of precious metals. That's like an order of magnitude lower than what the current industry standard is. And we do this with nanostructuring and crystal engineering to elicit very high performance from the core components of electrolyzers, electrodes.
So you can double hydrogen production, you reduce reliance on platinum and other rare elements, And you also lower the costs. How affordable will hydrogen be? I mean, thanks to your technology.
Let's talk about hydrogen costs. So currently, gray hydrogen before the crisis was about $1 to $2 per kg of production cost. It's a different point that given what's happening with the gas crunch worldwide, gas prices have risen 3 times. And so even gray hydrogen, for example, at the moment is quite expensive. When you add carbon capture and sequestration and make blue hydrogen, for example, that adds to the cost and takes it up to about $2.5 per kg. In contrast, based on renewable electricity prices as a range across the world, because some places it's very, very cheap, like Australia, for example, India, and other places it's more expensive. So it can range between $3 till $6 per kg. What SunGreen H2 does is reduce this price gap between the gray hydrogen at the $1 to $2 per kg and the green hydrogen at the $3 till $6 per kg. How do we do this? 2 ways. One is when we replace all the materials inside the electrolyzer components with very low cost, earth abundant materials that are not dependent on precious metals. The material replacement alone allows us to unlock cost savings at the stack level where the hydrogen is made. But then we are nanostructuring the materials so that they're producing double the amount of hydrogen. That means you only need half as much stack material and space to produce the same amount of hydrogen. And this is how we are bringing down the levelized cost of hydrogen to very quickly to parity with gray or fossil fuel-based hydrogen.
Hi, my name is Sarah Alcaldi, and I'm the host of a new podcast called Money Talks. Yes, we will be talking about money, but more than that, we'll also be talking about life, personal choices, lucky breaks, and how money is the thread running through it all. So look out for our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
There are skeptics out there that do not believe hydrogen will be the future of energy. Elon Musk called it the dumbest thing possibly imagined for energy storage and claimed that the efficiency of electrolysis is poor. Your take on his views?
We have to think about where hydrogen is most effectively used. If there is a way to directly electrify something, and electric vehicles are a great solution as well. We have lots of passenger vehicles, including the gentleman's product, out there on the road as well. However, you've got to ask yourself, how green is your grid? If you're charging and plugging in your electric vehicle in a grid that is still fossil fuel based, what are the life cycle emissions of using that particular technology? So I really try to take a full life cycle perspective. And there are lots of countries in the world, for example, where the grid is going green. There's high penetration of renewables in some areas. Hydropower and nuclear can dominate. And so it's not to say that everywhere the grid is not green. Many places the grid is going completely green. If you can directly renewably electrify something, you should, because that makes absolute sense. The problem is that you can only solve 25% of our CO2 emissions problem by directly renewably electrifying everything. Planes can't run on batteries. Aviation, there is no solution. Shipping, one of the major sources of the world's CO2 emissions, but a big bucket of those 75% of CO2 emissions that cannot be renewably electrified. That is where hydrogen comes in. And in the first instance, what we should really look at is hydrogen replacing hydrogen. What do I mean by that? The 90 million tons of fossil fuel-based hydrogen that we're using right now, that's what we need to replace with green hydrogen first. And the expanding use cases for hydrogen then, if we can get it, is based on direct hydrogen usage and derived fuels from hydrogen that can be used in our mobility applications, shipping, aviation, heavy-duty transport, power to X, I'll say it, as a means of a long-term renewable electricity storage. That's where then it starts to make sense case by case. But first things first, we need to replace the gray hydrogen uses in industry with green, and then follow on with the other remaining use cases for hydrogen in mobility and power to X applications.
I mean, to be fair, hydrogen has gone through hype and also disappointment cycles before. What kind of lessons can be drawn from past experiences?
I think those lessons have already been drawn. There is a time for everything. If we were going to start hydrogen usage in the 1990s, which is when the US administration under George Bush I had prioritized it as a way of sort of securing energy, that argument is even more justified today. We are seeing what's happening in Europe, We now know that energy security is one of the primary drivers for our energy transition, along with the fact that we're living in a carbon constrained world. Carbon as a commodity is going to get one of the most taxed commodities in the world. And we need to reduce this. And all of our net zero emissions aspirations cannot really be realized as long as we continue using carbon intensive means and fuels. So this is where I think the policy support comes in. However, let's think about real walking the talk kind of actions. In Singapore, we have an outlook now of setting ourselves up as an import-export hub for clean hydrogen going forward. The Energy Market Authority has clearly stated that hydrogen has got to be a big part of our energy mix if we're going to be decarbonized by 2050. As well as the government is supporting through multi-million-dollar grants Singapore to become a living lab for breakthrough hydrogen technology development. So that's one thing in Singapore, but globally, the European Commission just announced $3 billion in support for creating a hydrogen market and guaranteeing the purchase of all this hydrogen, creating the market in Europe, as well as the US administration recently passed $3 per kg tax credits for a decade. We saw what this did to the wind and solar industry 15 years ago. Now we will see the same thing for green hydrogen. So I believe that now what's different about the past is that we do have viable ways to bring green hydrogen to the market in a time manner sufficient for it to realize price parity with fossil fuels in and of itself. And that's why I believe that this time regulation and policy is being backed up with actual support mechanisms that will see us start to unlock affordable green hydrogen, including with technology like SunGreen H2s.
You mentioned solar and wind, and looking back, it took 30, 40 years to get to where they are now. How long before hydrogen starts to make a meaningful contribution to decarbonization?
Hydrogen can really be making a meaningful contribution now. I would argue that the real breakthrough from wind and solar has come in the last decade, more or less. And we are at the cusp of something similar happening in the hydrogen space, where over the next decade, even out to 2030, you will see huge advances and huge developments in the hydrogen space, many of which are already underway. And as well as while the industry targets cost parity with fossil fuels only by 2030, technologies like SunGreen H2 are going to make that possible very soon, even before 2025. So we're talking about 2 to 3 years before we start to see really prices coming down and wide-scale adoption for industrial decarbonization use cases.
So your company recently raised a $2 million seed round led by SG Innovate. How is the money going to be spent? What does the future of SunGreen H2 look like in, say, 5 to 10 years' time?
We're excited as well as grateful for the support that we've received from our investors who believe in our vision and the energy transition that hydrogen and green hydrogen specifically is going to unlock. When we think about the future, our vision is really for a decarbonized, democratized, clean energy system that is available at scale. And then when you have this kind of tool, there is no reason not to expect for wide-scale decarbonization in all of the sectors that we've spoken about. We see SunGreen H2 playing a fundamental role in that and helping to unlock almost 500 million tons of CO2 emission savings by virtue of the technologies that we will be releasing. Electrolyzer components to start with, making green hydrogen cheap and affordable, but also going forward, fuel cell components, battery components, and hydrogen panel components. And what we're doing is we're widening our moat. So we have a proprietary technology that is under patent protection. We're expanding the team very fast. We want to keep on building our team further with the best talents here in Singapore, but also as we expand outside into the Australian market and further ashore. So we feel that expanding our technology offering as well as a world-class team is going to allow us with those strategic partnerships to bring solution at scale for green transition materials for the energy transition.
Wow. Tulika, I can't wait to see how your technology will contribute to uplifting the entire hydrogen industry and helping the drive towards a more sustainable future. Best of luck, Tulika. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure.
Thanks to my guest, Tulika Raj, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and do remember to subscribe and like this podcast so you know when a new episode drops. You can find CNA's climate and sustainability coverage online at cna.asia. The team behind this podcast is Joanne Chan, Jacqueline Chan, Daniel Lee, and Crispina Robert. And I'm Julie Yu, signing off.